On November 9, 1934, a Yolngu clan leader named Dakiyarwar Panda walked out of Fanny Bay Jail in Darwin, a free man. He had been convicted of the murder of a mounted police officer and sentenced to death. But the High Court of Australia had overturned his conviction, ruling that his trial had been a substantial and grave injustice. He was supposed to return to his homeland at Duraputchby, his family waiting. He never arrived. Within 24 hours of his release, Dakiyar vanished without a trace. No investigation was conducted at the time. There were only rumors. The rumor, persistent and chilling, was that the slain officer's colleagues had taken matters into their own hands. That they had abducted Dakiyar from the Colin compound where indigenous people were required to stay after sunset. That they had driven him to the edge of the Berrimah Line, an unofficial boundary dividing the city from the bush, beyond which undesirables were taken to be dealt with. And that they had taken him out into Darwin Harbour, shot him, and dumped his body in the water. For more than 90 years, his family has been waiting. They have not been able to perform the proper ceremonies for their leader. His homeland has lain all but abandoned, outside the remote community of Baniyala on the shores of Blue Mud Bay. His clan, the Duty Japu, has been broken. A century of silence descended on Darwin. But now, the silence is finally breaking. An ABC investigation has uncovered new evidence, including a decades-old confession and new eyewitness testimony, forcing Northern Territory police to restart the cold case. And one man who has been silent for 40 years has finally spoken. If this story has held you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. And leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from tonight. To understand the vanishing of Dakiyarwar Panda, we must first understand the world into which he walked out of that prison. This is not a story about a man. This is a story about the entire colonial enterprise that swallowed the Northern Territory, and the law that was supposed to protect the vulnerable but instead became a blunt instrument for violent dispossession. The early 1930s in the Northern Territory were brutal. This was a world governed not by statute, but by a frontier code of retribution and racial hierarchy, a world made of places like the Colin compound, a notorious settlement where indigenous people were required to be after dark, a place of confinement and control. Berrimah Line is the key to understanding this world. It was not a line on a map, but a moral and physical boundary born of vigilantism. The term originated in the early 1950s, coined by Northern Territory Police Sergeant E.A. Sandy McNab, who used it to denote an informal boundary separating the serviced urban core of Darwin from the underserved rural expanses beyond. McNab would detain vagrants and unemployed drifters, provide them 1 week to find work, and threaten to return them to the Berrimah Line for abandonment if they failed. A particular policeman was known for running a brutal Berrimah Line policy, taking undesirables to the line on the road at Berrimah, given a physical boot up the arse. On your way, son. Don't ever come back. The world of Dakiyar was not only a world of official law, but of a parallel power structure, one that could erase a man so completely that he simply ceased to exist. A power structure that, for 90 years, the government and the police failed to hold accountable. The background to the case began in 1932, when 5 Japanese trepangers were killed after trespassing on a designated Aboriginal reserve in Arnhem Land. The Japanese government complained to the Australian government, who subsequently sent police to investigate the case in 1933. One of the investigating officers was Constable Albert Stewart McCall, who, in the course of his investigations, came across a group of Aboriginal women. One of these women was Dakiyarwar Panda's wife, Japari. Believing her to be a suspect, McCall chained her up. Dakiyar returned home while this was happening, and attempted to get to Japari, resulting in McCall firing a gun at him. The gun misfired, and Dakiyar threw a spear, which achieved a direct hit, killing McCall. Dakiyarwar Panda was arrested and charged with murder. It was suggested at the subsequent trial that McCall had been engaged in sexual intercourse with Japari, but this has been disputed in an oral account collected by historian Ted Egan during an interview with Japari in 1976. A contributing motive for McCall's murder was possibly that Dakiyar believed that McCall had come to Wouta because of the murders of William Fagan and Frank Traynor. These two beachcombers had arrived there in the dry season of 1933 and had negotiated with Dakiyar's group for firewood and the sexual use of Japari and her mother Wamirapu. One morning Dakiyar and another man had swum out to the boat, killed the two men and thrown their bodies overboard. At the center of this story is Dakiyar Panda himself. He was not merely a victim or a missing person. He was a revered leader of the Dudi Japu clan, a powerful man and a senior lawman. His status meant that his story is not just a personal tragedy. It is a tragedy of the land. Jamboa Marawili, another clan leader, explained the consequence: the thing should come out into the public for the world to see. It's about where Dakiyar has lost his life. Dakiyar's gone, but the place, his country and his pattern, song line, design, it's still alive. In April 1934, Dakiyar Panda was brought to Darwin by the Reverend A.J. Dyer and a church missionary society to stand trial. The court case became well known throughout Australia, and even received international attention. This was because of the amount of irregularities within the case, highlighting disparities and injustices in the way Aboriginal Australians were treated under the law. The first problem was that the only eyewitness to Constable McCall's death was Dakiyar's wife, Japari. At the time, white women in Australia were not expected to testify against their husbands, but the same law was not applied to Aboriginal Australians. Dakiyar was not allowed to testify himself. This meant his side of the story could only be told by his lawyer, who wrongly implied to the court that Dakiyar had admitted guilt for the murder. Another problem was that the interpreter used in the case was a police officer, which was an obvious conflict of interests. Procedural irregularities occurred at every step, the Australian Dictionary of Biography noted. On August 5, 1934, Judge T.E.A. sentenced Dakiyar to death for the murder of McCall. For days before his scheduled hanging, on August 29, 1934, Governor-General Isaac Isaacs ordered a stay of execution, pending an appeal, and the following day, the High Court granted the right to appeal. The legal system, however, was also a stage for a strange and exceptional event. The High Court of Australia intervened, becoming the first High Court to overturn a death sentence for an Indigenous person, recognizing the substantial and grave injustice that had occurred. The case was heard over 2 days, 29 to 30 October 1934, in Melbourne. The High Court unanimously found that there had been a miscarriage of justice, and that the trial judgment should be set aside. The white establishment had admitted its error, and they had to release him. But the cops had their own justice. For them, a release was an opportunity. The story of Dakiyar is also a story of a family seeking closure. His living son, Dukal Panda, carries the weight of 90 years of trauma. His plea is simple: I want my father. I want him taken back to Duraputchby because that's his homeland. The oral tradition in Darwin is that friends of McCall had murdered Dakiyar and disposed of the body in the harbor. As filmmaker Tom Murray put it, it's amazing to think about him walking around here 90 years ago, a powerful man, and he left to go to Darwin to face justice. He would have been thinking, I'm a leader of this community, I'm a senior lawman, whatever it is they've got, I'll face it, and I'm sure he was expecting to come back here and he never did. What exactly happened in those 24 hours after Dakiyar walked free is the central mystery. The official narrative says nothing. No investigation was ever conducted at the time. The story of his official release and subsequent disappearance is, in itself, a textbook example of institutional failure. Dakiyar was freed from Fanny Bay Jail, where he had been held for 7 months, and taken to the Colin compound in Darwin on November 12. The Reverend Dyer had arranged to meet him at the cinema, but Dakiyar did not appear and was never seen again. The evidence suggests a premeditated act of extrajudicial murder. A historian who researched the case, Ted Egan, was told by a witness that she overheard a particular policeman confessing to the crime, saying he and 2 other police officers took him out to Darwin Harbour and shot him. This confession, although not formally named due to a technicality, the witness died before she could sign a statutory declaration, has been part of the oral history for decades. Now, new testimony has emerged. Filmmaker George Giddos recently came forward to say that, in the 1980s, he heard eyewitness testimony from a veteran NT police officer who told him he was not on the boat, but he knew what was going to happen when police took Dakiyar out. He heard his colleagues bragging about the killing when they returned. He told me most definitely, as a fellow officer, that Dakiar was murdered and his body was put in the bay, Gittos said. The event was a murder, plain and simple. And the reason the police were able to get away with it was because the state itself created the conditions for that silence. In March 2025, colonial findings were made in relation to the disappearance of Dakiar Panda. These found that there was not enough evidence to hold an inquest, as it was unlikely to locate additional information, and emphasis was placed on the lack of information that were available on the exact circumstances of death or remains. The coroner found that while there was a motive for a then-serving member or members of the Northern Territory Police Force to harm Dakiar, there was no reliable evidence that any of them acted on it. She ruled he was not in custody at the time of his death. The coroner's finding that Dakiar was not in custody when he disappeared from Darwin's notorious Cullen compound, where indigenous people were required to stay after sunset at the time, has been called unjustifiable by filmmaker Tom Murray, who has stayed in regular contact with Dakiar's family. I think that what people have been hungering for is justice, and what the coroner's report didn't do is give people enough that felt just, he said. For 90 years, the official record on Dakiar was one of mystery. In 2023, NT Police began making inquiries into the case. But then the ABC investigation revealed the police officer's alleged confession and Gittos' eyewitness testimony. In response, Northern Territory Police announced they were restarting the official investigation. The Police Cold Case Task Force is now carrying out investigations into the disappearance of Dakiar Panda in 1934 in light of recent reporting by the ABC. They are engaging with Dakiar's family. The investigation is now grappling with a dual problem: it must prove a 90-year-old murder, and it must reckon with the state's complicity in that act. It is an investigation not merely of a disappearance, but of an entire system. During his interview with historian Ted Egan, acting Sergeant E.A admitted that if the same thing happened today, the official response might have been different. Well, yeah, that's right. I guess if it happened now, there would be a massive investigation, E.A said. Gittos has also thrown his support behind the family's vision for a reconciliation center to be built in Dakiar's name. Knowing that community, I know that they're damaged by the fact that there's never been any full recognition that Dakiar was killed, he said. It sort of gave them a lesson that there can be no justice for First Nations people in Australia, and that stayed with them. That's the folklore that little children in the community learn. Yolngu MLA Ngia Mark Gayola has joined calls for a reconciliation center to be built in Dakiar's grandfather's name. He's a fighter, he's a warrior, and so people are still saying those people responsible for taking him away, they need to tell the story, open and transparent. There needs to be truth-telling, and this is what people are calling for, he said. Mr. Gayola, whose own grandfather was murdered in a colonial massacre, said the center could serve as a memorial to all Aboriginal Territorians killed in settler violence. My other grandfather was just nearby, and then they heard a shot go off just a few meters away and he ran over, he said. My grandfather ran over, father's father, to go and find out what had happened, and he saw this man on horseback got off and started dragging my other grandfather too and just covered him up. Those people lived there, and these are the massacres that happened. Some are very, very untold stories. The case of Dakiar is not just a cold case. It is a moral reckoning. His family is not just seeking answers, they are seeking a fundamental reshaping of history. They want justice, not just for their father, but for all people, to be represented by a makarata, the Yolngu concept of a ritual for peace and a state of reconciliation between enemies. They want to see the establishment of a reconciliation center in Dakiar's name, where his descendants can share their knowledge of culture and law, to foster understanding between Yolngu and non-indigenous people. The silence of 90 years is ending. As Dakiar Panda said, he walked from that jail, he's supposed to go back to his homeland. He didn't get there. My father is gone. But the truth will find its way back. The NT government has said it will take Dakiar Panda's proposal into consideration and refer it to the relevant department for review. But for the family, the wait continues. Gittos says it is part of the reason he decided to come forward after so many years and finally reveal what he knows, along with the fact he was never contacted by the coroner's investigator despite being prepared to testify at an inquest. I've carried this secret all these years and I care about that community, and there's a little bit of guilt on my behalf that I couldn't have done more, he said. The case of Darwin Panda stands as one of Australia's oldest missing person cases. It is a story of a man who, in seeking justice, found only death. It is a story of a system that, in the end, failed to protect him. And it is a story of a family that has never stopped fighting for the truth. There have been many explanations for his disappearance, including that he was the victim of a vendetta or had absconded. But the oral tradition in Darwin, supported by the testimonies of Egan, Giddos, and the veteran officer who witnessed the event, is that friends of McCall had murdered Darwin and disposed of the body in the harbor. As NTMLANG Mark Gaiola said, those people lived there and these are the massacres that happened. Some are very, very untold stories. They need to be shown what happened, they need to be told what happened, way back when, and it is still going on. What do you think of this story? Do you believe the police force of 1934 covered up a murder? Should the government and police be held accountable for the crimes of its past? Leave your comment below. We read every single one, ****. If this story has moved you, if you want more forgotten chapters of history, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. And share this video with someone who needs to understand that the past is never really past. We'll see you in the next one, ****.